like the farmers in Merredin.
Order, Senator
That's
Lyons. Time for the debate has expired. Questions without notice. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Cormann. Can the Minister confirm there are 928,000 Australians over 35 years old who will snap back to living on $40 a day after December and who will be ineligible for the Morrison government's hiring credit scheme?
The Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank Senator Wong for that question. No.
Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Can the Minister explain that despite unveiling a budget with a debt well in excess of $1 trillion, the Morrison government has left nearly 1 million Australians over 35 years old without work behind?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. No, I cannot confirm this. What the Morrison government has delivered last night is our plan to get Australia out of the COVID recession and to get Australians back into work. We are not accepting that people will remain on income support forever and a day. We are actually working to get people back into work. And we understand that there is a difference between people that have a track record in the workforce, that have been employed before in terms of their employability, and the challenges faced by a more vulnerable segment of the population in the context of the COVID recession, based on experiences in previous recessions. We understand that young Australians who've either not yet been in the workforce, who are about to get into the workforce, who have only just recently been engaged in the workforce, are in a comparatively more challenged position, and that it's very important that we ensure that they do not become entrenched in terms of having to rely on welfare support. That is why we've put in place the particular hiring credit, in order to provide particular support to young Australians. But of course we want all Australians to get back into work.
Senator Wong, a final supplementary question. Order.
How many of the—
Senator McKim. Senator Wong, please.
How many of the 928,000 Australians aged over 35 years will still be out without work when JobKeeper ends in March and be left to live on $40 a day when JobSeeker snaps back in December?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. We are working to ensure that every single Australian has the best possible opportunity to get back into work.
Order.
That is what we're doing. We are working to ensure that we get Australia out of this COVID recession, that we get Australians back into work. And of course, when the Australian people, unlike the Labor Party, understand why we are in the position we're in, they also understand that Australia, while it's been tough and while we will continue to go through a tough period, that we are in a comparatively stronger and better position than most other comparable advanced economies around the world. And we will let the Labor Party continue with the sniping. We'll continue to work to get every Australian. We continue to work to give every Australian the best possible opportunity to get back into a job.
Senator Scarr.
Mr President, my question is to Australia's absolutely outstanding Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann. Can the minister inform the Senate how the Morrison government's 2020 to 21 budget sets out a comprehensive plan to get Australia out of the COVID recession and Australians back into jobs?
The Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank Senator Scarr for that very important question. Mr President, the budget we delivered last night is indeed our plan to get Australia out of the COVID recession and to get Australians back into jobs. Jobs and more jobs. We are focused on saving the jobs that are needing to be saved. We are there to restore the jobs that were lost. We are there to create more new jobs, but it will be a private business, a private sector-led recovery. Because on this side of the chamber, we understand that jobs don't grow on trees. On this side of the chamber, we understand that jobs are created by viable, successful, profitable, growing businesses, which is why in our budget we have taken a whole series of very important measures to ensure that businesses have the best possible opportunity to be successful into the future and to grow, because we know that a growing business will hire more Australians. And that is, if you look at the measures that we've taken since the start of the COVID pandemic started, $507 billion worth of fiscal support, 25.6% of GDP in support of the Australian people and our economy, Mr. President. This budget alone provides $74 billion worth of support measures as part of our Job Maker plan to drive the strongest possible private sector-led economic recovery and to drive the unemployment rate down, which will be good for the economy, which will be good for the opportunity of working families around Australia to get ahead, and which will be good for our budget and for budget repair into the future. Because, of course, more people in work means more revenue for government from income tax. It means lower payments on welfare support for job seekers. Because of course, that is what we are focused on. That's what we've achieved in the past, and that's what we'll work for in the future.
Senator Scarr, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, can you outline some of the major job-creating measures in the 2020-21 budget?
Senator Cormann.
Very much, Mr. President. Our Job Maker plan aims to support about 1 million jobs over the next 4 years. Our Job Maker hiring credit will boost jobs growth by offering an incentive for businesses to hire younger job seekers. Treasury estimates that measure alone will support about 450,000 jobs for young Australians at a cost of about $4 billion. Mr. President, other job-creating measures which will help all Australians who are looking for work include our record investment in upskilling and reskilling Australians, starting with the establishment of the $1 billion Job Trainer Fund to create more than 340,000 free or low-cost training places. 340,000 free or low-cost training places. $1.2 billion to create 100,000 new apprenticeships and traineeships with a 50% wage subsidy for businesses who employ them. $1.4 billion.
Senator Cormann, time for the answer has expired. Senator Scarr, a final supplementary question.
Minister, how will tax cuts play a crucial role in the Morrison government's economic recovery plan?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Bringing forward income tax relief for hard-working families, focusing on low and middle-income earners across Australia, that puts more money into their pockets, boosts their take-home pay, but it also helps to stimulate the economy, because of course it will lead to a strengthening of aggregate demand in the economy. It will help ensure that businesses across Australia are able to benefit from a strengthening in demand. The budget also delivers, of course, significant other tax cuts. These tax cuts which we are proposing now, about $17.8 billion worth, build on $8.1 billion worth of tax relief, which is being delivered for the 2020-21 income year under our previously legislated personal income tax plan. In 2020-21, low and middle income earners will receive tax relief of up to $2,745 for singles and up to $5,490.
Senator Cormann, time for the answer has expired. Senator Mariel Smith.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women, Senator Ruston. Why, in a budget racking up in excess of $1 trillion in debt, did the Morrison government allocate just 0.024% to spending promises in the Women's Economic Statement? Why is the Morrison government leaving Australian women behind?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Senator Smith, for the question. The federal government is absolutely delighted to be able to have presented the second Women's Economic Security Statement as part of this budget, and a number of new measures that have been able to be added to the ongoing measures that are embedded in every part of the budget to support Australia's women. And part of our plan for the economic recovery that was announced, which was our budget last night, we believe that women play a very important role. First and foremost, we also understand that the most important thing that we can do for women is to make sure that they have access to work, when and if they want it. But there are a number of measures that were listed last night in the Women's Economic Security Statement, which include a couple that particularly in my area, the announcement of the paid parental leave changes to ensure that women who have missed out on being able to get paid parental leave because of the circumstances surrounding them becoming unemployed meant that they couldn't meet the work test. So we have allocated $130 million over this 12-month period alone to make sure that women who found themselves out of work due to the COVID pandemic are able to still access their paid parental leave, because we understand many of those women probably had made the decisions in relation to their families before the pandemic hit. We also have made sure that we have made a very strong focus of getting women into work in areas of science, technology, engineering and mathematics, because we understand the jobs of the future are going to be around that science base, because so many of the exciting opportunities for Australian employment going forward are going to be in these areas. So there are a number of areas in the budget that are focusing on making sure that women have the opportunity to be able to take the jobs of the future and supporting them in their education, their skills and their training to make sure that they can take those opportunities.
Ruston. Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
Can the minister confirm that for the more than 754,000 women accessing job seeker and youth allowance, the Morrison government's budget is simply offering a reduction in their support payments and a training course?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And the answer to your question, Senator Smith, is absolutely no. The federal government has made an absolutely unprecedented support package in place for all Australians, including Australian women. We have put in place, in March, we put in place the coronavirus supplement that was available for all Australians, but equally we understand that Australian women have equally been impacted by job losses. And we have, in the July Economic Fiscal Update, made the announcement in relation to the continuation of that supplement. But the most important thing that we can do as a government is to make sure that we work with businesses, because it will be businesses that create the jobs, to enable Australian women who found themselves without work during this pandemic to be able to give them the opportunity to be able to go back into work, because it will not be government that creates jobs. Governments don't create jobs. It will not be the government that spends us out of this recession. It will be business.
Order, Senator Ruston. Order. Senator Smith, a final supplementary question.
Why, despite slugging Australians with a debt in excess of $1 trillion for generations to come, is there nothing in the Morrison government's budget to make it easier to access childcare and increase women's workforce participation?
I remind senators to remain silent during order. I remind senators that while interjections are always disorderly, they are particularly unhelpful during the question being asked. Senator Ruston.
Well, thank you, Mr President. Well, I would absolutely refute the accusation and allegation in the question that I've just received. This government has gone out of its way to make sure that we've supported all Australians, and that includes women, and particularly women who have children, to make sure that they have the same opportunities as all Australians. But as I said in the answer to my previous question, it will not be without the support of a strong and profitable economy, strong and profitable businesses that provide the employment opportunities for women.
Senator Ruston, I've got Senator Wong on a point of order. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. The question did relate to nothing in the budget in relation to childcare. Just wonder if the minister representing the Minister for Women might want to return at some point to that question.
That was part of the question. I will be honest, that was one question that I missed being able to transcribe all of it because of the noise in the chamber. That was part of the question that I heard. I'll call Senator Ruston to continue.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, I would draw the attention to those on the other side of the amount of support that this government has provided to childcare during the last 6 months to support Australia, to support Australian women and families, to make sure that they have got access to the support that they needed. When they were out, when businesses were shut down, they had nowhere for their children to be able to get to work, and so they were provided with additional support. We have supported the childcare sector through this pandemic, and we will continue to support the childcare sector.
Senator, order. Senator Watt. Senator Rennick and Senator Watt. Senator Bragg. Senator Rennick and Senator Watt, save it for State of Origin. Senator Bragg.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Can the Minister update the Senate on the Morrison government's plan to get Australians back into jobs, as outlined in last night's budget?
The Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Bragg for the question. Mr President, as Senator Ruston has articulated, it is employers that create jobs. Governments put in place policy frameworks that employers lever off, and certainly the Morrison government is focused on putting in place those policies that will ensure Australian businesses are able to prosper, grow and create more jobs for Australians. And in fact, since the Coalition was elected to office in 2013, to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the economy has now created in excess of 1.5 million new jobs. And, Mr President, last night's budget further demonstrated the Morrison government's commitment to getting Australians back into the workforce. The Australian economy is now fighting back from COVID-19. And in fact, in the last 3 months, we've seen around 458,000 jobs created. And as our Senator Cormann has stated, the government is particularly focused on ensuring that young Australians who've been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 are able to get back into the workforce. Last night, the Treasurer announced our $4 billion hiring credit. This will give employers who take on an eligible job seeker aged between 16 and 35 an incentive of between $200 and $100 per week for 12 months. And we anticipate that this hiring credit will help around 450,000 young Australians that we want to get back into work. And, Mr President, that is of course on top of the announcement we recently made of $1.2 billion to create an additional 100,000 new apprenticeships. And again, this announcement, it's all about doing what we can do as a government to ensure that we have the best policy framework in place to get Australians, and in particular young Australians, back into work.
Senator Bragg, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How does the government's JobMaker hiring credit enhance existing incentives to help Australians back into work?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, as I've said, we know that young Australians have been disproportionately affected by the impact of COVID-19. And the Morrison government's $4 billion hiring credit will support around 450,000 positions by giving employers an incentive for each new job they create over the next 12 months that employs someone who's been on income support in at least one of the 3 previous months at the time of hiring. Now, the hiring credit itself, though, complements other existing government wage subsidies that are already in place. We already have in place a number of wage subsidies for existing cohorts of people, such as parents returning to the workforce, Indigenous Australians and the long-term unemployed. We also have a $10,000 restart wage subsidy that actually helps job seekers aged over 50 to get back in the workforce. And in the last few years, that has actually assisted 50,000 Australians to get a job.
Senator Bragg, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. How has the Coalition's record of strong economic management built the foundation for our JobMaker plan for economic recovery?
Senator Cash.
Well, thank you, Mr President. And while the impacts of COVID-19 have been absolutely devastating on the Australian economy, it must be remembered that Australia entered this crisis from a position of economic strength. And that is why last night we were able to hand down the budget and make that further level of investment that we did. When we entered COVID-19, the economy was growing, and in fact we had record employment participation, labour force participation in Australia. The unemployment rate had fallen to 5.2%, and the budget was back in balance for the first time in 11 years. And as the Prime Minister says to Australians, we have done this before, we've got your back, we will put in place the right policies to ensure that we can emerge stronger on the other side of COVID-19. And that is why, as we emerge from the health crisis, the JobMaker plan that we have outlined to the Australian people will get Australians back into work.
Senator Griff.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck, and relates to the budget measures for home care packages. According to the latest quarterly report from the Department of Health, there are still 103,599 Australians waiting for home care packages and 7,400 waiting for a Level 4 package. While the government's media release talks about the number of places it has funded since 2013, it appears the budget allocation of only 23,000 extra places still leaves a shortfall of at least 70,000 places. Can the minister explain why the budget only promises 23,000 additional home care packages over 4 years across all package levels, despite current wait lists of 100,000 people who are waiting up to 18 months for a package for which they have been approved?
The Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank Senator for his question. Mr President, since the 2018-19 budget, this government has invested $4.6 billion in 73,105 new packages, and last night's budget allocation of 23,000 new packages, which is not over 4 years but over the next 12 months, will make a significant change to those who are waiting for a home care package, Mr President. And what we're doing is exactly what we said we would do when the Royal Commission handed down its interim report in November last year. We will continue to invest in new packages, as we've done on 3 occasions now, 10,000 in November in our response to the interim report, 6,105 in July, and then 23,000 last night, Mr President. And this financial year there will be an additional 30,000 home care packages injected into the system. Mr President, we have to grow the workforce. These 30,000 packages will create about 6,000 jobs. 6,000 jobs, Mr President. And to assist with that, Mr President, we've also allocated funding to the Workforce Industry Council of over $10 million, and as we announced last week in conjunction with Minister Cash, over $10 million to support training of nurses to go into an aged care support. And there are a number of other packages, Mr President, through other portfolios, for example the Job Trainer program, which will provide incentives to employ other people into the residential aged care sector. So, Mr President, the waiting list now has reduced by over 20% since I came to this portfolio. The 30,000 new packages that are being allocated will make a significant contribution to reducing that further.
Senator Colbeck. Senator Griff, a supplementary question.
Minister, percentages aren't people. When you look at real numbers, and 30,000 is a long way away from meeting 100,000. Now, out of the packages that have been announced, only 2,000 will reportedly be offered at Level 4, which, as you know, is the highest level of care. Now, around 30,000 older people have died while waiting for their approved package in the past 3 years. Why hasn't government allocated more packages to the areas of highest need?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator, for the question. Mr President, the government has allocated the packages to the areas where they will most quickly reduce waiting lists. And so where the demand is and where they will most quickly reduce waiting lists. That's the whole point, Mr President. So the allocation of the packages, the 30,000 packages over this financial year, have been allocated to reduce waiting lists, so that people don't have to wait as long as they have been for the care that they want through a home care package. But can I also make the point, Mr President? The inference that people are left without care is an incorrect one. All of these people have access to Australia's excellent health system to support them. All of them have access to Australia's excellent health system, and 98% of them have an interim package, have access to an interim package or a support through CHSP. They are not left without support or care, Mr President.
Senator Griff, a final supplementary question.
The budget paper allocates $21 million over 4 years to, and I'll quote, delay the implementation of payment in arrears for home care services. Yet the government introduced a bill that allocates home care funding in arrears in an attempt to address the millions in unspent funds that are being held or often not returned by providers when aged care clients pass away or enter residential care. Does this mean the government plans to delay the reforms by 4 years that will cost $21 million in unaccounted for funds?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. And the answer to the question is absolutely not. Mr President, we delayed the implementation of the payment in arrears cycle, because we didn't want to have a negative impact on home care providers during COVID-19. It was having a significant impact. Mr President, we will follow through with the legislation. I'll be presenting some further information, legislation, the second phase of that, into the parliament before Christmas, and we will be implementing the payment in arrears process during the early phases of 2021.
Senator Betts.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston. How is last night's budget providing support for new parents whose work has been interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Betts for his question and acknowledge your ongoing interest in the area, particularly supporting Australia's families. And your very thoughtful op-ed yesterday that I'm sure everybody in here read in the Examiner. But sadly, like so many Australians, women, expectant mothers, faced significant job losses as a result of the coronavirus pandemic through no fault of their own. And that's why the package that was announced yesterday of $130 million over the 12-month period to support those parents who were previously employed but found themselves unemployed and as a result did not meet the work test for paid parental leave in the time limit that was allocated. Under normal circumstances, the work test requires a parent to be in work for 10 out of the previous 13 months prior to the birth of a child in order for them to qualify for paid parental leave. But as of the announcement last night, those women who have gave birth between the 22nd of March this year and the 31st of March next year will be able to have a change in terms of the arrangements, and that is that instead of 10 months out of 13, it will be 10 months out of 20 months, recognising that the difficulty of the pandemic. So that will affect around 12,800 families and maintain their connection to the workforce. But we also really understand that many couples had probably made decisions in relation to starting a family before the devastating impact of COVID pandemic, and therefore had made their arrangements in relation to their finances and structured their lives, believing that they would be eligible for paid parental leave. So this temporary change recognises that for those 12,800 people, that we understand that they would otherwise have qualified for paid parental leave, and now they will be able to get access to it.
Senator Betts, a supplementary question.
I thank the Minister for that answer and ask further, how do the measures for new parents build on the flexibility changes the government has already made to paid parental leave earlier this year to benefit dads and partners?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, earlier this year we passed legislation to provide new families with increased flexibility around how they use their paid parental leave entitlement. Previously, it was required that mothers take the full 18-week entitlement block in the year after their baby's birth. But under the changes that were passed earlier this year, we now have a situation where the first 12 weeks is taken in the first year, but in order to provide flexibility for the other partner, the remaining 6 weeks can be taken any time in the succeeding 2 years of the birth or the adoption of a child. And it also, as I said, it's very important that now we see that mothers can transfer their entitlement to the other parent or the other partner in order for them to be able to have access to this leave as well. And this certainly means that dads are able to share in the support of the newborn with these new arrangements. And we also understand that not all families are the same, and so we want to make sure that we've got greater
Senator
flexibility.
Ruston. Senator Betts, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How is the government supporting grieving families for whom Mrs Purnell has so ably advocated, who suffer from the loss of a child?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, I was really pleased to be able to, and I am very pleased to be able to inform the Senate that as part of the budget process, we've improved access to bereavement payments for parents who suffer the tragedy of a stillborn or where their child passes away in the before their first birthday. When I came into this place, and I acknowledge Senator Keneally for her work in this area, it became obvious to me that there were, in some instances, lesser payments paid to somebody, bereaved parents, depending on the circumstances of their families for their child's death. So what we have done is said the new stillborn payment will be up to $3,600 for parents on low incomes to support them with the personal and financial impacts of this tragedy. This will support about 900 families every year. We clearly understand that no amount of money can ever make up for the grief of losing a child, but we hope in some way this will support parents through that grieving period.
Senator Waters.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Finance Minister, Senator Cormann, regarding the budget. Tax relief for most Australians who earn less than $90,000 a year will disappear after 1 year. But millionaires and people like Clive Palmer and Gina Rinehart will get tax cuts of $2,500 a year permanently,
Order.
increasing further to $11,000 a year in 2024. Now, of course, tax cuts mean nothing if you don't have a job, and yet unemployment support is on the chopping block. Why has the government chosen the millionaires over the million unemployed Australians?
Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I completely reject the premise of the question. Senator Waters is false. We have baked in tax relief for low and middle income earners into our tax system through legislation passed by this Parliament. And they say, oh, but just for 1 year. No, no, no. What they're referring to here is the fact that we have extended by another year the low and middle income tax offset. So we are in fact doubling the income tax relief available for low and middle income earners. So you have completely misread the announcement. I mean, what we've of course done here is bring forward income tax relief that was due to come into effect from 2022. Instead, it's going to come into effect from 1 July 2020. And what we've also made sure is that those who've already benefited from this income tax relief because they were first cap of the rank when it comes to providing income tax relief in our previous legislation, we have effectively doubled their income tax relief for this year.
Senator Waters, a supplementary question.
Yes, thanks, President. With a gas-led recovery that goes against recommendations from scientists and economists, and taxpayer handouts to the Vales Point coal-fired power station, which just happens to be a generous Liberal Party donor, why has this government chosen to prop up climate-destroying industries rather than support a jobs-rich transition to a renewable energy future?
Order on my right during the question. Senator Cormann.
Mr. President, colleagues won't be surprised to hear me say I completely reject the premise of the question, because our government, yes, we are committed to maximising the strength of the recovery, but we're also committed to do so in an environmentally efficient fashion, and we are committed to supporting renewables. In fact, our investment in renewables across Australia is higher than that in countries like Germany, France, in fact across the European Union as a whole. I see them shake their heads. If you look at what we are investing in renewable energy in Australia on a per capita basis, it's about triple. It's about triple to what is invested by Germany, for example. But of course, gas is going to be an important part of our economic recovery. I mean, if we want to ensure that our manufacturing sector can be internationally competitive, and we do, then gas is going to be an important transition fuel as part of on that journey. Of course it is. And any reasonable—
Senator Cormann. Senator Waters, final supplementary question.
Thanks, President. Given that women have been hardest hit by the COVID crisis, compounding existing gender inequality, and domestic and family violence is at epidemic levels, why has the government chosen to invest only 0.035% of the budget in measures to address women's economic security and provided no new money for frontline domestic violence services? None.
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Under a succession of outstanding Minister for Women's Interests in the coalition, from Senator Cash all the way through now to Senator Pine, we have made very substantial investments in terms of measures to prevent and to address domestic violence, including in this budget. I mean, there's another $150 million worth of support specifically—
Senator Waters, on a point of order.
Point of order, President. Misleading the Senate. There is no
Order,
new money
Senator
in this
Waters.
budget.
That's a matter for debate. Please, you know better than that, Senator Waters. There's an opportunity after question time to debate the merits of answers. Senator Waters, I ask you to please respect the ruling. That's not the appropriate way to raise a matter of substance in an answer. Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And as a result of the contribution of successive outstanding coalition ministers for women's interests, from Senator Cash through to Senator Payne, we have made a substantial commitment to the prevention and to addressing domestic violence, including through additional investments in the wake of the COVID pandemic, given some of the concerning consequences that brought with it in this space. $150 million worth
Order,
of additional
Senator
support.
Cormann. Time for the answers expired. Senator Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Sport, Senator Colbeck. Minister, what is the total taxpayer funding committed to support Australia's participation in the 2022 Winter Olympics to be held in Beijing, the capital of the People's Republic of China? Given the gross human rights abuses committed by the Chinese government, including what amounts to genocide against the Uyghur people, the suppression of democratic freedoms in Hong Kong and the imprisonment of Australian citizens on trumped-up national security charges, how can the government morally support Australian participation in the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing? Would you agree that Australia should step away from what will be a massive Chinese communist propaganda spectacle? Will you, as the Sports Minister, confer with the Australian Olympic Committee and the Australian Winter Olympic Institute to bring about an Australian boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympic Games?
Minister for Sport, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, can I say that Australia remains deeply concerned by reports of enforced disappearances, mass detention, forced labour and pervasive surveillance of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, and by restriction of freedom of religion and belief in China. Mr. President, these concerns are reflected, I think, across the Parliament and the Australian community, and I note Senator Abet's contribution to the Parliament during Senator's statements earlier today. Mr. President, Minister Payne has clearly conveyed the Australian government's concerns about the situation in Xinjiang to China, including during her last 3 meetings with State Councillor Wang Yi and during her address to the UN Human Rights Council on the 14th of September this year. Mr. President, Australia will continue to raise our concerns during sessions of the UN Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly, as we have done consistently during recent sessions. Mr. President, I have some figures on support for winter sports. I will note that all of the funding allocations made to winter sports are available publicly on the Sport Australia website. The last financial year figures that I have for high-performance allocations were for the Winter Olympic Institute of $5.25 million, and ski and snowboard received $1.61 million for able-bodied sport and $1.23 million for parasports. Mr. President, those numbers go beyond Winter Olympics.
Order, Senator Colbeck. Senator Patrick, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, is it not the case that the International Olympic Committee's 2017 adoption of human rights principles in its host city contracts does not apply to its agreement with China for the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing? Will you, as Sports Minister, contact your counterparts in other Western democracies to urge that their countries boycott the Beijing Games?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in relation to that particular matter, I do note the comments of Foreign Secretary Raab in recent days, where he indicated that it was his instinct to separate sport from diplomacy. Mr. President, I share those instincts, but I do not step back from the comments that I made in response to Senator's primary question. Neither, I think, do anybody in the parliament. Mr President, we have a range of avenues to advocate strongly for human rights in China, including directly with China and in multilateral forums. We will continue to raise our concerns, as we've done consistently through the joint statement with 38 other countries to raise concerns about human rights in Hong Kong and in Xinjiang.
Senator Patrick, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, would you agree that if Australia is to boycott the Beijing Games, that decision should be taken now, without delay, so that Australia's Winter Olympic athletes will know where they stand and that appropriate financial support can be provided to the AOC and Winter Olympics Institute? Will you commit to full support for our athletes who should not be asked to compete at an event that will promote a communist government engaged in genocide?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Can I say that it is not the government, but the Australian Olympic Committee, the independent Australian Olympic Committee, who are responsible for sending teams to Winter and Summer Olympic Games and are independent from government, Mr President. And I share Senator Mackenzie's view that I don't believe the Australian Olympic Committee require financial assistance from the government. In fact, they're quite proud of the fact that they don't receive any. Mr President, it is clearly outlined in the AOC's objectives that the AOC has exclusive authority for the representation and participation by Australia at the Olympic Games, Winter Olympic Games, Youth Olympic Games, Youth Olympic Winter Games and at regional games, including the selection and discipline of all members of the team to represent Australia at those games.
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Finance. At what dollar value and in what year will gross debt peak?
Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann.
Mr President.
Order. Order.
Are you interested in the answer? Okay, thank you. So gross debt is projected to keep growing until it stabilises at about 55% as a share of GDP towards the end of the. I mean, honestly,
order. Order. Can we please hear the minister who is being directly relevant?
They are assuming.
Senator
I'm trying to get the answer, but they're clearly
seconds.
not interested in the answer. They're just more interested in playing politics than actually listening to the answer. So thank you very much, Mr. President. As I was saying, gross debt is projected to keep growing until it stabilises at about 55% as a share of GDP towards the end of the decade, which equates to about $1.7 trillion. Wow.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr President. In 2013, the minister described $280.3 billion in gross debt as a disaster. How then do you describe the $1.7 trillion of debt racked up on your watch?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, unlike the Labor Party, the Australian people understand why we're here. They understand about the impact of the COVID recession on our budget, because they understand that as a result of 1 million Australians losing their job in 1 month, that has had a severe impact on our government revenue and will have a severe impact on government revenue for some time to come. Government tax receipts over the forward estimates are projected to be $227 billion lower than anticipated at the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. $227 billion without having made any decision, just as a result of parameter variations. Now, you seek to make the comparison with your period in government. Let me tell you, the GFC was nothing compared to what we're dealing with at the moment. The contraction in global growth was 0.1%. 0.1%. We are dealing with a contraction in global growth 45 times as high. 45 times as high as what you were dealing with. And
order. Senator Cormann. Senator Gallagher, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Can the minister confirm that even before the pandemic he had overseen a doubling of gross debt and now leaves the role as Finance Minister with Australia's highest ever debt level, peaking at a staggering $1.7 trillion.
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. What I can confirm for Senator Gallagher is what I've confirmed on a number of occasions before,
Senator Watt.
and that is that before the pandemic, the gross debt and the net debt position
Watt,
under our government was much better than it would have been under Labor, because we corrected the forward trajectory that we inherited from you.
Senators
we
Gallagher
inherited
and
an unsustainable
Keneally.
spending and debt growth trajectory from the
Senator
Labor Party,
Rennick.
and we brought that trajectory down. And I
Senator
will forever,
Wong.
Mr. President, I will forever be proud. I will forever be proud about the fact that I played my small role in helping to repair the budget during our first 6 years in government, to the point where we returned the budget to balance, and to the point where Australia was able to enter this pandemic from a position of comparative fiscal and economic strength. Now, I know the Labor Party is not interested in this, but Australia went into this pandemic in a stronger position than just about any other advanced economy around the world, and in a stronger position than we would have if we'd stayed with your policy settings.
Has expired. Order. Order. I will call the next question when there's silence. Senator Watt. Senator Hume, Watt, and Senator Wong. Senator Watt, please at least pause when I call your name. Not often from the same side of the chamber. Senator Stoker.
My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Birmingham, and it's about something that is very, very close to my heart. Can the minister outline how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan rebuild and create jobs in Australia's tourism industry?
Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I thank Senator Stoker for her question, especially as a senator from the great state of Queensland, with its very strong interest in our tourism industry and the number of tourism businesses across Queensland. Mr. President, our unprecedented scale of economic support for Australian businesses during the COVID recession through programs such as JobKeeper and small business payments of up to $100,000 has sustained hundreds of thousands of jobs and tourism businesses across Australia. And as part of our plan to ensure and secure the future of our tourism industry, we have outlined an extensive range of supports to keep the industry going through these incredibly tough times. Importantly, last night's budget outlined a cash flow boost for companies with a turnover of up to $5 billion by allowing them to temporarily, up to June 2022, offset tax losses against previous profits and tax paid in or after 2018-19 through a temporary loss carryback. This is an exceptionally important decision for many Australian tourism and travel businesses. It will help them in terms of further cash flow support and is a crucial addition to other measures, targeted measures that our government has undertaken. On World Tourism Day, we announced a $51 million regional tourism recovery initiative to support some of Australia's most internationally reliant tourism regions, including in Senator Stoker's home state of Queensland. We've equally announced a $50 million business events grants program to get events, conferences, trade shows, exhibitions up and running again across the country. Our $100 million investment at a minimum in specific tourism infrastructure across our tourism regions will help regions to get through the tough times and to build back better. And our $231 million record funding for Tourism Australia will help to motivate the domestic tourism market and crucially position us well when we can safely welcome back international visitors.
Senator Stoker, a supplementary question.
Can the minister advise how employers across the tourism industry have responded to the government's plan that was outlined in last night's budget?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr. President, the tourism industry has warmly welcomed a number of the measures across the budget. The Australian Tourism Export Council specifically welcomed the tax loss carryback initiative, which they said will help to stem some of the flow of loss to business and support them through to the other side. The Australian Hotels Association said that it will help hospitality businesses to expand and grow in the months ahead and described it as a considered budget that will deliver comprehensive support. While the Restaurant and Catering Association acknowledged the work the government is doing to stimulate demand, that it will help thousands of hospitality businesses to bring back young employees, and they describe the budget, Mr President, as a real recipe for recovery. Equally, many individual businesses across the country have welcomed this, such as Matt Waller, the owner of Adventure Bay Charters in Port Lincoln, who on ABC Radio thanked the government for what we're doing and described the budget as an amazing opportunity for tourism businesses like
Senator
his.
Birmingham. Senator Stoker, a final supplementary question.
Can the minister advise how the government's plan for recovery and jobs in tourism interacts with the decisions of state governments, including in my home state of Queensland?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, our government has provided unprecedented scale of support through JobKeeper, through small business payments and through the various other measures announced in last night's budget to support tourism businesses across the country. It's crucial, though, that we see state governments step up as well. I look indeed, Mr President, at the $51 million regional support package we announced, $20 million of which is headed to support internationally dependent tourism regions in Senator Stoker's home state of Queensland. The Palaszczuk government announced a very similar initiative last Saturday, only it was worth just $5 million. Mr President, we need to see governments do more across the states and territories in terms of their support for tourism industries. Equally, I saw Western Australia's Tourism Minister say the other day that there wouldn't be any rooms for visitors in Western Australia. Well, certainly Tourism Accommodation Australia say that they have rooms ready to be occupied.
Order,
Mr President,
Senator
and
Birmingham.
states and territories
Time
need
for
to
the
help
answer
to fill
has
them.
expired. Senator McAllister.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women, Senator Ruston. Frontline domestic violence workers have been clear that the additional money provided for domestic violence services in March does not go far enough. Can the Minister confirm that all the Morrison government's budget has offered to women fleeing domestic violence is a re-announcement of what they already offered in March?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you, Senator McAllister, for your question. Well, the answer is no. This government has made an extraordinary commitment to making sure that we support women who make the extraordinary, brave decision to escape domestic violence. And as you would be well aware, Senator McAllister, or well, you should be well aware, this government has a number of programs that are ongoing to support women who find themselves in the unfortunate position of requiring frontline domestic violence and family domestic violence services. They include the $340 million that has been put towards the 4th Action Plan, and currently we're in the process of consulting in relation to a further action plan to make sure that we're not only dealing with the response that we find that we have to undertake in response to women who find themselves in a situation where they're facing domestic violence, but also to make sure that we are putting in place the things to make sure that we are preventing it into the future. As you rightly point out—
Order. Senator McAllister on a point of order.
It is a question of relevance, Mr President. I asked whether the minister would confirm whether all that was offered in the budget was a re-announcement. She has stepped through the re-announcements and done it again in this chamber, but I am really looking for a confirmation of whether there is anything new in the budget paper at all.
Senator McAllister, you've restated that part of the question, but also the minister— I can't ask the minister to answer it in certain terms as long as the minister is directly relevant. And you mentioned yourself that the minister had been stepping through various announcements. My point being that's a matter for debate. The minister is being directly relevant. Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And if you read your budget papers, you'll see that there was actually a new announcement that hadn't been announced before in relation to the ongoing funding for Australia's National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1800-RESPECT. 1800-RESPECT, because we believe that this is one of the most important resources to women who are escaping domestic violence so that they can make sure that they have on-demand— and I take the interjection from Senator Watt. I think it was Senator Watt that interjected. It is not a re-announcement. It is a new announcement in relation to ongoing funding for the 1800-RESPECT hotline. But as I said, this is in addition to, the $150 million that was made available just to address the issue of domestic violence during the COVID pandemic, as well as the $340 million of ongoing funding in relation to the Fourth Action Plan.
Senator McAllister, a supplementary question.
As early as March this year, domestic violence services and refuges across the country warned the government of an expected increase. Why has the government failed an expected increase in domestic violence during the pandemic? Why then has the government failed to deliver support to these women in last?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, as Senator McAllister should know, that the responsibility for the delivery of frontline services rests with the states and territories. We, as a federal government, provide the funding to the states and territories, and in addition to the ongoing funding, we provided $130 million in additional funding to the states and territories to support them in their support of women who are escaping domestic violence. In addition to that, we ran the Help is Here campaign, which very successfully provided advice to women who found themselves in need of support to find out where the services were available to them, and providing counselling and other support to women who found themselves victims of domestic violence during the COVID pandemic. And only last week, Senator McAllister, we made the announcements in relation to the allocation of the funding for 40 new facilities to provide safe places for women who are escaping domestic violence.
I could barely hear Senator Ruston at the end of that question. Senator McAllister, you have a final supplementary.
Mr President, women over 55 are the fastest growing group of homeless Australians, and yet last night's budget delivered nothing to address women's homelessness. What advice does the minister have for women over 55 who are facing homelessness and have been left behind by this budget?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, this government takes very seriously homelessness, and equally homelessness of older women is of particular concern. However, and the federal government provides, on a normal year, $6 billion, Senator Watt, $6 billion to support the states and territories and the delivery of homelessness and community housing projects to make sure that we are lifting our weight when it comes to supporting people who find themselves in need of housing. But this year, Senator Watts, just for your information, because this is a demand-driven scheme, we will be providing $7.5 billion in support of social housing and homelessness initiatives to support the states and territories for the delivery of these frontline services to help all Australians, but particularly to make sure that we are helping older women who find themselves in this particularly difficult situation as a result of the pandemic.
Order, Senator Wong, is this point of order?
I seek leave. I'm seeking leave to table the budget paper number 2, which demonstrates that the 1800 respect number to which the minister referred was announced in February, and ask her if she would like to correct the record now or later.
Order. You've sought leave, Senator Wong. I'll call the Leader of the Government.
Thank you very much, Mr President. As Senator Wong knows, the budget was tabled yesterday, but if she would like, if she would like to table the budget again, I'm happy to give her leave.
Is leave granted? All right, order. Senator Wong, you've asked for leave. I've asked there's a time for debate. You've sought leave to table something and make a point. I've allowed you to make the point. I've asked for leave, and the minister has granted leave. Senator Wong.
I'm seeking leave to move a motion to require the minister.
Well, that is a different matter.
Correct the record.
Okay. Well, that is a different matter.
If she wishes to do it after question time, we'll give her leave then.
Order. Senator Wong, that is a different matter than the one you just raised. So, is leave granted for that? Is leave to move a motion to, if I'm correct, Senator Wong, to call the minister to make a statement to the chamber? Is that a correct characterisation? Well, Senator Ruston.
In order to assist, Senator Wong, I don't believe that I did mislead the Senate. However, I will return to the Senate today and make any clarification or qualification should I have been incorrect.
Senator Henderson.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck. With record funding for aged care outlined in last night's budget, can the minister outline the Morrison government's plan to provide more home care packages to support senior Australians since the 2018-19 budget, including since the interim report of the Royal Commission?
Order on my left. Order. Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks Senator Henderson for her question, Mr President. Mr President, supporting senior Australians to live in their own homes has always been one of this government's key priorities. At every opportunity, Mr President, we have provided additional home care packages to help senior Australians with their household tasks, to get the equipment that they may need and access personal and clinical care as they age in their own homes, Mr President. Last night, Mr President, the Morrison government has announced $1.6 billion for an additional 23,000 packages, building on the $235.7 million, investing 6,105 packages announced in July, Mr President. This means that over this financial year, this government has around 30,000 new home care packages will be available to senior Australians. 30,000 new packages, Mr President. This brings our overall investment to an additional $4.6 billion in 73,105 packages since the 2018-19 budget, Mr President. And I do recall, Mr President, at the last election, the opposition went to the election with $387 billion worth of new taxes and not a single home care package, Mr President. Not a single home care package. So their crocodile tears fall on very, very deaf ears over here. Mr President, by the end of this financial year, we will have tripled the number of home care packages that were in place when we came to government in 2013 under Labor. And, Mr President, we will not stop until senior Australians have access to the package and the care that they need.
Senator Henderson, a supplementary question.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Senior Australians need a skilled and responsive aged care workforce. How is the government developing and supporting the aged care workforce now and into the future?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, more home care places mean more jobs, and our latest announcement of home care will generate almost 6,000 new jobs over the next 12 months. Last night we announced an investment of $10.3 million to support the Aged Care Workforce Industry Council to lead the implementation of the Workforce Industry Strategy. And last week, as part of our response to the Royal Commission's report, Mr President, the government announced $10.8 million to expand the Australian College of Nursing Scholarship Program, to establish an aged care transition to practice program and establish the skills development program for nurses and personal care workers in aged care. Mr President, the funding will provide opportunities for the aged care workforce to increase their skills and capabilities and support them to be well equipped to ensure the care and protection of people in care.
Senator Henderson, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. The Royal Commission recommended action to reduce the number of younger people with a disability going into aged care. What has the government done to date to address this important issue?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, thank you for the question, Senator Henderson. It is important that young people with complex needs get the right care and in the right setting, Mr President. The government is proactively working to address the Aged Care Royal Commission's finding that residential aged care is not the appropriate place for younger people except in exceptional circumstances. Mr President, we are already making progress in this space. As at the 30th of June 2020, the number of people under age 65 years in residential aged care has reduced from over 6,000 in 2017-18 to 4,860 as at the 30th of June this year. And, Mr President, the government is providing another $10.6 million to to continue to reduce the number of people aged and under 65 or at risk of residential care, in conjunction with the plan to reduce the number of people in aged care.
Senator Colbeck. Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Senator Ruston.
Provide additional advice to Senator Watt. I took on notice yesterday and said I would provide additional information to the chamber in relation to the Emergency Response Fund. The fund provides an additional and sustainable source of funding for emergency response and recovery from natural disasters in Australia that have significant or catastrophic impact. The Director-General Emergency Management Australia is responsible for providing the Minister advice on accessing the fund and the design of programs to be funded. When that advice is received, the responsible minister will consider the most appropriate use of the fund, taking into consideration the other significant amounts being spent on resilience-building activities, which include the $261 million joint state-Commonwealth funding over 5 years for risk reduction activities in line with the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, $88.1 million for new world-class disaster resilience research centre, $25.9 million annually indexed and ongoing to the National Aerial Firefighting Centre, and $8 million towards the development of a public safety mobile broom ban capability. For recovery, funding of up to $150 million per year may be accessed if existing recovery programs are insufficient. For resilience and preparedness, or to reduce the risk of future disasters, funding of up to $50 million per year is also available. The government committed an initial $2 billion for the National Bushfire Recovery Fund to coordinate the national response to rebuild communities and livelihoods after the devastating 2019-20 Black Summer bushfires. That amount far exceeds what was available from the Emergency Response Fund in any given year, and for that reason the fund has not been accessed for recovery. A formal decision of the government is required to access the Emergency Response Fund. Access to these funds are subject to arrangements detailed in the ERF guidelines tabled in the Senate earlier this year. Public infrastructure such as toilets are covered under the disaster recovery funding arrangements. Privately owned toilets are not covered under disaster recovery funding arrangements, but support may be offered through grants to small business, primary producers and other mechanisms. I cannot provide any more specific advice without the details of the toilets you were referring to. The government is always willing to work with members of the opposition to support those recovering from natural disasters. I'm sure victims would prefer the opposition to work collaboratively with the government as well.
Thank you, Minister Ruston. Are you taking note, Senator?
Wouldn't have to take note of
you
that
want to take
statement.
note?
Yeah,
yes.
Before we get to the question time. Do I need leave?
You can move to take note.
I move to take note of the minister's statement. I thank the minister for returning to the chamber and answering this question that I asked yesterday. I must admit I was disappointed with her answer yesterday, A, because she didn't know the answer, and B, because she dismissed this emergency response fund as some fund. Well, that some fund actually matters very deeply to bushfire victims and to people who are threatened by natural disasters right across our country. It appears from all the weather forecasts that we are currently receiving that the greatest threat we face in terms of natural disasters this summer is actually in the form of cyclones and floods, particularly in the northern part of our country, rather than bushfires. But the fact remains that whatever funds the minister wants to refer to now as being available for disaster purposes, the fact remains that the government is sitting on a $4 billion emergency response fund, which was set up to allocate $200 million per year for disaster recovery and mitigation work, and not a single cent has been spent to date from that emergency response fund. We voted with the government last October to establish the Emergency Response Fund. This was something that the government announced in last year's budget, last April, which is what, 18 months ago. 18 months ago, the government announced an Emergency Response Fund, a $4 billion fund, which would provide $200 million a year for disaster recovery and mitigation efforts. And here we are, 18 months on, not a single cent has been spent. Now, it's not as if there aren't projects that this money could be being used for. We referred to one yesterday in question time. In Bega, one of the towns badly affected by the bushfires last year, there is a community group who is currently crowdfunding to obtain funds to build new toilet facilities at their evacuation centre. the toilet facilities that they have in place at the moment and that they had to use at last bushfire season, you have to go upstairs to access them, which means that elderly people and disabled people can't actually use these toilets when they're in an evacuation centre. It's completely unacceptable. Now, these people are, of course, always threatened by the risk of bushfire. They live in an area which is at high risk. What is to say that we don't get more bushfires there this year and people, elderly people and disabled people are not able to access toilets when they go to an evacuation centre? What is to say in North Queensland or the Northern Territory or anywhere else in Northern Australia this summer, when we get hit by a cyclone, as appears inevitable, that there weren't cyclone shelters that could have been built using these funds, there weren't flood levies that could have been built using these funds, but here we are, 18 months on from this emergency response fund being announced by the government in last year's budget, without a single cent having been spent. I really hope we don't get to this summer witnessing cyclones, witnessing floods, witnessing bushfires, and wish that we had the opportunity to use these funds, but that opportunity was blown. We saw what happened last year when this government failed to prepare for the bushfires. They were warned repeatedly by climatologists, by ex-fire chiefs, by the opposition, by all sorts of people, that we faced intense bushfire risk. And yet they didn't prepare. They didn't get the aerial firefighting in place that was required. They didn't take all sorts of other steps that were required and could have been taken, which would have avoided the tragic losses that we saw in last year's bushfires. And now, here we are, 18 months on from this fund being announced, not a single cent having been spent from that fund. We're now in bushfire season in northern parts of the country. There are bushfires happening right now in my home state of Queensland, as far north as Cooktown. So we're in bushfire season already. We're probably a couple of months away from cyclones and floods, and we've got this $4 billion fund that is sitting there completely unused when there are projects that communities are crowdfunding for to build. This government has got to do better. They have got to be better prepared for the disaster season that lies ahead than they were last year. They have funds at their disposal. They should use them, and they should stop community groups having to turn to crowdfunding to provide basic infrastructure to keep them safe.
So the question is, the motion is moved by Senator Watt to take note be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against, I believe the ayes have it. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I rise to take note of the answers given by Senators Cormann and Ruston to the question asked by Labor senators. So, in question time today, the responses that we received from those ministers confirmed what we already have come to know about this budget, and it's a budget that leaves millions of Australians behind. Australians who, through no fault of their own, Madam Deputy President, have lost their job or are out of work during the deepest and darkest recession we've faced in a lifetime. In particular, this budget leaves behind Australian women. Women workers have been hit particularly hard by this recession. Yet, where are the measures put forward to get women back into work? Where is the plan for jobs in industries dominated by women? Industries we know that have been hit the hardest by the Morrison recession. The government has put forward nothing, no new initiatives, no policies to deal with the gender pay gap or to tackle the retirement income gap. There is nothing in this budget to rectify the imbalance in women's super. Nothing for domestic or family violence services, not one extra dollar for frontline services. Now, Madam Deputy President, this is the government's 8th budget, their 8th budget deficit. Despite their endless rhetoric of the past decade, that mob over there have never been able to balance the budget. They haven't paid down any debt. In fact, they're clocking up $1 trillion of debt. A complete repudiation of the decade of nonsense they have pursued as they bleated about debt and deficit. They are the masters of debt and deficit. They own every cent of it. And despite all of the spending, the budget still doesn't go anywhere near enough to create jobs. It fails to build this nation. It fails to build our future. It fails to strengthen our nation by spreading equality and opportunity. Now, despite, Madam Deputy President, what those opposite want the Australian people to believe, this budget quite clearly leaves far too many Australians left out and left behind. We know the government expects a further 160,000 Australians to lose their jobs before Christmas. We know that unemployment is forecast to be far too high for too long. This includes 928,000 Australians over the age of 35 currently on JobSeeker, people who are actively searching for work, and yet this government has chosen to exclude them from being able to access hiring subsidies. For many of these Australians, the government has chosen quite deliberately to sentence them to long-term unemployment with all the terrible consequences we know that brings. And to rub salt into the wound, they want to return JobSeeker to just $40 a day. How cruel, how heartless, how economically reckless. Australians need and deserve much better. Over $1 trillion of debt, a track record of no delivery and no plan for the future. That's what this budget is. That's what this budget is, Madam Deputy President. And this budget has quite clearly overlooked my state of Tasmania, in particular the north and the northwest of Tasmania. In fact, it looks like northern Tasmania has been left off the map. There is nothing in this budget to bust traffic congestion in Launceston, no progress on the Launceston Eastern Bypass, no progress on the Sidelink, a pitiful underfunding of much-needed works on the long-neglected West Tamar Highway. There is nothing for the East Coast, nothing for the Tasman Highway from Launceston to Sorrel, nothing for the Arthur Highway. Once again, nothing in this budget for traffic congestion in Hobart. And there's nothing to gear up Hobart Airport to receive international flights, despite the rhetoric from the Assistant Minister from
Thank you, Senator Brown. Your time has expired. Senator Canavan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy President. Look, I feel a little bit sorry for the Labor Party at the moment. Some of maybe my Catholic guilt coming in here, but I feel a little sorry because they are struggling here, struggling a little to mount a logical and coherent rebuttal or opposition, if you like, to last night's budget. I know it's the job of the opposition to oppose, and so I know they naturally feel this morning that whatever was announced last night, they are duty bound to take an opposition viewpoint. But it's pretty hard. I think you've just seen it's pretty difficult, because this is a moment that I think most Australians want to see us come together and support the country and the nation, recover from what has been a probably once-in-a-century upheaval to the global economy. So it would be, I think, a little more productive and constructive, if the Labor Party came into this place and put forward some productive and constructive ideas about how we can recover from what has been the worst recession in our nation's history, rather than simply oppose everything that has been put forward. As I said, there's errors right through the Labor Party's response to the budget here that's been provided today. I mean, the very starting point of their response is incorrect, clearly incorrect. We've seen the Labor Party try to get some kind of traction out of this term, the Morrison recession. For for a political slogan to work, it has to have some kernel of truth, some basis in fact. I mean, does anyone think that the recession that we are experiencing right now is a result directly of the actions of this government? That is absolutely absurd. When every country in the world, effectively, certainly in the Western world, has faced record-breaking reductions in economic output, it is not something that is alone to the Australian government. In fact, if you were to put us up against each other, the economic impact here has been much, much lower, and we've had fortunate status of being an island and locking up our borders. We accept that. But the economic reduction output here has been about 7% in Australia. Our friends across the ditch, it's been well over 10%. In the UK, it's been 20%, and in most countries in Europe, well into double-digit reductions in economic output. So it's not something that's directly caused by this government. There are errors in this government with this Labor Party response too. I just heard Senator Brown there say that there's no new money for women or domestic violence. That's absolutely incorrect. I actually don't have time now to go through all of the initiatives for women in this budget, but just to hone in on the point on domestic violence, there is money put forward to protect against domestic violence in this budget. There is provided more funding for the Help Us Here advertising campaign, especially over Christmas this year, where we know people will face challenges. There's $4.8 million to give continued effect to the ban on direct cross-examinations and $1.8 million in the budget towards criminalising breaches of family court orders. There's also $10.2 million for family and federal circuit courts to ensure the safety of vulnerable litigants and to manage the sharp increase in urgent applications we've seen through COVID. Now, those measures also actually build on the $150 million the government has already put aside across the last 2 years to support Australians experiencing domestic, family and sexual violence from the fallout from COVID-19. So millions of dollars put aside from by this government during this pandemic to help those experiencing domestic violence, and more funding provided last night as well. There's a logical incoherence, as I mentioned, to this Labor Party's response. They are, on the one hand, criticising the government for debt increasing, which has been a necessary consequence of the economic fallout, and on the same hand saying, well, JobKeeper and JobSeeker in particular, we just heard from Senator Brown, has to stay higher for longer than what it is. Well, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to spend more, we're going to increase debt. The desperate thing now is to get Australians back to work. That's why we're offering hiring incentives for apprenticeships and other workers. We have to get people back to work. We cannot keep paying people to sit on the couch right now, especially when many businesses I go to are desperate for workers. I was at a citrus farm in Emerald last week. They are ripping up trees right now because they cannot find workers. We've got to get people back to work so we stop the economic destruction of our country. And finally, I don't want to provide advice to the Labor Party, but as I said earlier, it would be much better, I think, and more constructive if we work together now to recover this nation, just as this budget is doing last night.
Thank you, Senator Canavan. Senator Chisholm.
Thanks, Madam Deputy President. And it is pretty remarkable to get a lesson in scare campaigns from Senator Canavan. He is someone who has been the master of those, so for him to come into this chamber and deliver a lesson to us on scare campaigns is completely unbelievable. I certainly know that the Productivity Commission must hang their heads in shame when they think about his former tenure at the Productivity Commission as well. But it is pretty remarkable to hear these Conservative senators from over the other side come in here and defend the $1 trillion debt that this government has got itself into. And it is pretty remarkable that they could plunge us into this $1 trillion debt and still leave so many people suffering and as a result of the long-term damage of this Morrison recession that we are dealing with. And it is important to remember that the economy was already weak before we found ourselves dealing with this COVID recession that the Morrison government has overseen. And I'll get to the specifics of what we went through in question time today, because it was really important, the questions that we put to the government and highlighting some of the issues that we did. But I also want to highlight the lack of imagination and vision in this budget that was delivered last night. A government so small in vision that as we confront this challenge, and already in an economy that was already weak, that they offer so little hope about what a better future looks like. So for those Australians that are doing it tough and have suffered as a consequence of COVID, this government actually offered nothing last night for those people to look forward to over the next 18 months, 2 years, as hopefully Australia and the world recovers. And there's no expectation from Australia and its people that we can actually come through this stronger. It's almost as if the government said to those people, we're going to continue to bottom along here, hit the bottom of the ocean, and then hopefully one day we'll emerge out of this, but it isn't going to be so people can look forward to something better. It isn't going to be so that people are going to have the opportunity to retrain or get into different forms of work. It is going to be a very bleak future for those people who have been impacted. And this is where we directed our questions in question time today. We focused on the $1 trillion debt that leaves many Australians behind. All the announcements, all the spending, they're still expecting to add 160,000 people to the jobless queue by Christmas. So if you listen to the rhetoric from those opposite and what they've been announcing in recent times, it is still going to get harder for a lot of people between now and Christmas, only a few months away. So they're racking up $1 trillion in debt, but unemployment is going to be too high for too long, and many Australian families will suffer as a result. I think the question that we put to the government by Senator Wong on those people over 35 who are looking for work, so 928,000 of them. I know that there are so many of those in regional Queensland. I think of places like Hervey Bay, Maryborough, which already have high unemployment over the last couple of years. The number of people in those areas that will be impacted by this that are going to be excluded from the hiring incentives. That will have a very significant impact in regional Queensland and make it much harder for these regional economies to recover because of decisions by the government. So they offer no delivery, we know that. They offer no plan for the future for these people to have something to look forward to. And the decisions taken by this government in the budget mean that the recession will last longer, it will be deeper, and more people will be impacted than is necessary. They offer no plan to lift the permanent rate of job seeker from $40 a day. Imagine the anxiety from those people out there who are on this rate now, trying to plan for what their future looks like. The government offered them nothing last night. We know the plague of insecure work and the damage that that has done, let alone the role that's played in the outbreaks in Victoria. The government offered nothing to tackle insecure work, nothing to improve access to childcare, which will be so important for so many families and parents who want to get back into the workforce, and something that the Labor Party has been campaigning on strongly now for months is around social housing. Such a great opportunity to provide some long-term vision and some long-term good out of this challenge, provide employment for people, but have something for people to look forward to so that they had that opportunity to get into a secure house, and the government again provided nothing for them. They give nothing to Australians so that they can have any confidence that their future is going to be better once Australia emerges from this crisis.
Thank you, Senator Chisholm. Your time has expired. Senator Seselja.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy President. I, like Senator Canavan, am Catholic, but I don't share any of his Catholic guilt when I look across at the squirming of some of our Labor senators, whether it's Senator Chisholm or Senator Brown, as they seek to defend the absurd and ludicrous and delusional lines that are being fed to them by the Leader of the Opposition, Anthony Albanese, and by the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, who had quite the cracking performance on Insiders, it must be said, which I'll come to. But they've been fed these lines, and the lines are effectively this, and we heard sort of both of them from the two Labor senators' contributions. The first line is that we're in recession and it's all the government's fault, and there isn't this global crisis that's occurring that's seen an economic hit that is 45 times the size of the global financial crisis. So the first part of their delusional message, which they're being asked to trot out, is, look, nothing to see here. There's no crisis. I mean, this is the Morrison recession, they say. This is what Jim Chalmers was saying on Insiders on the weekend, and I'll come back to that. But they also talk about debt. They want to talk about debt because they want people to pretend, one, there's nothing going on here and there's no reason why the government has been forced into this position. But they also want to take this absurd and have this absurd double standard where they come in here and they tell us we're not spending enough on JobSeeker, we're not spending enough on JobKeeper, all of these programs that they want us to spend more on, and yet they're then complaining about the debt. You can't have it both ways. Now, David Spears, to his credit, put this to the Shadow Treasurer on Sunday. You know, he said, here I mean you've been critical about too much debt being racked up. At the same time, you want the government to spend more on JobKeeper, as you pointed out, JobSeeker, aged care, social housing, universities and childcare. Can you just clear up? Do you want the government to spend more or less? And it's a very good question for the Labor Party as they flail around looking for a rationale for their being, as they flail around looking for a critique of this budget. You can't pretend we don't have this global crisis, which is 45 times the economic hit of the global financial crisis. You can't pretend that we haven't seen this downturn right around the world, and the fact that, relatively speaking, as difficult as it has been, Australia has done much better than most. Now, that's something we can be proud of, whilst all the while saying these are tough times and they take extraordinary measures to respond to it. So you can't come in here and say, spend more, spend more, spend more, and then complain about the fact that there is more debt. Well, that's going to happen. Unless your plan is to rapidly ramp up taxes, as you've done in the past, as you took to the last election. You know, that was the plan. And in fact, Jim Chalmers was on Insiders again and again failed to distance himself from the negative gearing policy, from the franking credits policy. That still remains Labor's policy. So is that the way you're going to lower debt? Is it going to be by taxing retirees? Is it going to be by taxing homeowners and renters, as you took to the last election? Or are you going to get real and realise that we're dealing with a significant crisis? Now, in this budget, Deputy President, the government has sought to respond to the circumstances that we find ourselves in with a focus on getting Australians back into jobs. And I, for one, am very proud, and I know my constituents are very happy about the tax cuts that are coming their way. You know, for average income earners, around $2,500 per person, around $5,000 per household. Now, $5,000 per household, $100 per week that's going to be there. Now, some people have said, oh, well, it won't all be spent. Well, it may not all be spent. A significant amount of it will be spent, some of it will be saved, and that will support households as well as they make decisions going forward, as they make the decision to pay off their mortgage. I'm really proud we've been able to deliver local infrastructure projects, and I point here in the ACT to our massive injection to expand the Tuggeranong Parkway, the Molonglo River Bridge, the Monero Highway. These are really important projects, and we're seeing them right around the country, delivered by this government. Now, when it comes to this budget, we are absolutely with a laser-like focused on getting young people back into work. And that's why giving a credit to employers who hire young people is so critical. We don't want to see a generation lost as we saw under Labor's recession in the early 90s. We're going to continue to do this job. This is a budget that is very, very important.
Thank you, Senator Seselja. Your time has expired. Senator Green.
Thank you, Madam President. Deputy President, sorry, gave you a promotion there. Must be so deflating to have come in here one day after the budget, having to give a 5-minute speech about what your government's delivering, and actually only be able to deliver 60 seconds of things that the government is doing to get us out of the worst economic recession in a century. And I know that Jim Chalmers, the Shadow Treasurer, came to Cairns last week and heard firsthand about how this economic crisis is impacting Cairns and the far north Queensland region. And that was a really important visit because we know that this government has left far north Queensland behind. This budget, delivered yesterday, includes no new projects for Cairns, no extra funding for social housing in far north Queensland. One of the areas hit first and worse by this economic recession, and not a single project in Cairns announced. Just more re-announcements, more press releases re-announced, redrafted, but not a single project for Cairns. That is at the same time that the government is ripping $29 million per fortnight out of the local economy in far north Queensland by cutting JobKeeper. What the budget failed to do yesterday is replace that funding, to replace those jobs. We know that jobs will be lost in Cairns and in places in far north Queensland because of this economic recession. And the task for the government last night was to explain to people living in regional Queensland how they were going to replace JobKeeper funding with jobs. And they failed to do that. Not a single project for Cairns. In Mackay and the Whitsundays, well, they've missed out as well. They missed out on the $62.8 million local jobs task force, which covers Cairns and Townsville. Whitsundays is one of the areas hardest hit by the economic crisis, and yet they've been completely left out of a local jobs task force. The federal government, the Morrison government, is leaving regional Queensland behind during this economic recession. But that's not the only people they decided to leave behind last night. When it comes to the Women's Economic Security Package, there's very little new funding for women, and no funding certainty for the things that we really need to see in the future to secure women's economic certainty. No new funding for childcare to bring down the cost of living, and no plan or strategy for how we're going to improve childcare costs over the short term and the long term as well. A re-announcement of an announcement around domestic and family violence, funding that had already been announced, re-announced again. I mean, do they just think women won't notice? That we don't know how to read the budget papers and we won't figure out that this is actually something that you announced in March? $0 of new funding under that package. Women over 35 will miss out on the wage subsidy scheme, so older women will also miss out through this budget. And on the paid parental leave changes that the government actually did include in the budget last night, that will make sure that women who did lose their job will still be eligible to PPL. They want a pat on the back for this measure. It is the least that you could do for women who have lost their job, because we know that more women have lost their jobs during this economic crisis. And you want a pat on the back because women who are pregnant now are eligible for PPL? That is the least that you could do. The economic recovery plan for women, I've got it here. The top three things that you've listed, first is the JobKeeper payment. Well, you're cutting that and you're going to cut it again. So there goes that idea. Then you've got the job-making hiring credit. Well, that doesn't include women over 35, so we'll just forget about them. Then the next thing, tax relief. Okay, but everyone's getting that. So that's not really just for women, is it? Like, the economic response to women losing their jobs
Thank you,
is for
Senator Green. Your time has expired. So the question is that the motion is moved by Senator Brown to take note of answers be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against, I believe the ayes have it. Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, Deputy President. I rise to take note of the response given to my questions to Senator Cormann. Now, I asked the Finance Minister about facets of the budget. I asked about why millionaires are going to do better than the million unemployed out of this government's budget. I asked about their cooked gas-led recovery and the fact that some of their donors are now getting taxpayer handouts in this budget, and yet there is pittance for renewable energy. And then I asked about why there is not a single cent for frontline domestic violence services in this of all years, when we have said what was already epidemic rates of domestic violence further increase. Unfortunately, Mr Cormann, true to form, rejected the premise of the question. I don't know why they think that line is a real good one for them, because, frankly, it's just a national eye roll every time they trot it out. So they've rejected the premise of the fact that millionaires will do better out of these tax cuts than ordinary Australians. And most ordinary Australians who earn less than $90,000 a year have got that one-off injection through the low and middle income tax offset that expires after 1 year. But those tax cuts, that will disproportionately benefit the already well-off, and twice as many men as women, I might add, they'll last forever. But the low and middle income tax offset, just 1 year, a temporary boost, and yet they want to try to claim some kind of equity here. Well, they're not fooling anybody. Now, the gas-led recovery. This flies in the face of climate science, it flies in the face of economics. I think the minister trotted out that he thought that more gas would actually somehow stimulate manufacturing, when we know that the sky-high gas prices, thanks to all the gas that we've been exporting as we cook the climate with it, has actually made it harder for onshore manufacturing because it's increased gas prices. So I genuinely don't understand how he can possibly have a different interpretation. But what was announced last night is public money to open up 5 new gas basins, 2 of which are in Queensland, the Galilee Basin and the North Bowen. Now, there's some pretty good quality farmland in those areas, and this government wants to use your money to give big multinational gas corporations a tax break to rip out that fossil fuel in a way that will endanger the groundwater, wreck the on-surface operations of anyone that's actually using that land, probably don't care whether they've got traditional owner consent or not, and then will leak tonnes and tonnes of methane to atmosphere. This is the so-called gas-led recovery, when instead we could have seen genuine investment in clean renewable energy that creates more jobs. This government has gone into the biggest debt ever, but it's giving this money to millionaires, it's giving it to big corporates, and it's giving it to big polluters. Like, you had a chance to fix the future, to bring us back for a green job-led recovery where we invest in actually climate action and services, hospitals, schools, things that people rely on and frankly deserve. But no, it's just yet more money for big corporates and for millionaires. $99 billion in tax cuts and corporate subsidies. Well, what an absolute joke. I mean, I guess that's why this cosy relationship between the donors and the politicians continues to astound and aggravate every single ordinary Australian that I speak to about it. Now, the last aspect I asked about was why women are such an afterthought in this government. We know they don't have many women on their cabinet. We know they don't have a women's budget impact statement. They don't have a gender lens. Tony Abbott got rid of that in 2014, and they've consistently refused to bring it back. Well, last night they released a 2-page women's economic statement with the budget, and then a few hours later they hastily released a slightly longer and very glossy paper that frankly didn't say much more, and that constituted 0.035% of the budget spend. I'm afraid we are more than 50% of the population, folks. We deserve more than 0.035% of the budget. And as I said before, there was not a single cent of that money, that pitifully small money, for frontline domestic violence services. Now, they're trying to rely on some earlier announcements, which were welcome but very, very small. The women's safety sector asked for $12 billion over 12 years. They want $1 billion a year to keep women and children safe. What did they get? Big fat zero. I don't know what more we have to do to get this government to keep women and children safe and to do the right thing. How many more women are going to have to die for us to get proper funding?
The question is the motion moved by Senator Waters be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. The